And we are live today with CBM Calling. Thanks everyone for joining us. We're glad that you did. And today I'm joined by Sharlene Craig. Some of you will know Sharlene. Sharlene worked with CBM for a number of years as our Director of Member Care and Human Resources, and you supposedly retired a few months back, but you've actually continued on caring for our field staff and our staff in the member care role. And so we're really happy to have you with us. And it's good to see your face, Sharlene, because it's been a little while since I've seen you.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
It has. Today we actually are talking about so it's a little bit of a departure from what we have been talking about on here, which most of the time we've been talking to our global field staff. But today we're actually going to be talking about mental health. And that's a topic that, that's why we've asked you to come on, Sharlene, because I know your own background in social work, you've had a lot of experience with this topic. And so, you know, and just thinking about how in this time, people must be incredibly, like just the amount of change that has happened in this past month is just so much for us to process. And we're all trying to figure out, you know, how we're supposed to be coping with this new reality that we find ourselves in. So where do we even begin to process all of this?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm one of those people who is trying to figure out how to deal with it. And so I think it's just a process that we're all going through. But really, this is an unprecedented experience, isn't it? I mean, nobody around the world has dealt with this before. And there's so much uncertainty. We're bombarded with changes that are happening just constantly. There's new information, there's new advice, there's new living situations, there's new restrictions. It just keeps coming. And I think that raises a whole lot of feelings. You know, what do I do in response to that? How can I try to be responsible without being overwhelmed? It strikes me, unless this sound like kind of a bit of a downer, I'm just going to name some of the things I think that we're all going through. One certainly is just, we have a lot of fears. You know, there's kind of the obvious ones about, you know, will I get COVID-19? That's the clear one. But you know, if I do or somebody else does, how will I care for them? You know, what about if I get sick with just, you know, I may have a pre-existing health condition, or what if I need medical care? What's that going to be like? How do I get food? How do I do the basics? You know, yesterday I braved Costco in the morning, and what should have been a 45-minute experience normally was a 3.5-hour one. And I came home and I was completely exhausted by the time I had wiped down all my stuff. And, you know, I was stunned by how much energy just that thing took. For people who are working, especially those in essential services, to have some, you know, healthcare professionals and others who are providing support to really vulnerable people in group homes and those kinds of things. You know, the stress of, have I sanitized enough? Should I wear a mask? Should I not? Then there are others who don't have much structure to their life, and so it feels like things are just on hold waiting for something else. So to distract yourself or to think about other things, then will this happen, is tough. You know, what will life look like on the other side of this? You know, I personally choose not to look at the stock markets or any of those kinds of things and try to think just, you know, now. And then there's kind of that, when will this be over kind of question. And I think one of the things that's the most destabilizing is, you know, many of us maybe struggle to plan a year ahead, or, you know, a couple of years ahead, or maybe even a season ahead. But right now we're struggling to plan next week. We really don't know what that's going to be like. So I think there's that piece that is just around some of the fears that we have. And then there's also just the losses that we're grieving. You know, freedom of movement. I used to be able to walk in the park that's close to me, but now I'm limited to the street, for which I'm hugely grateful, because I know a lot of people can't do that. But there's no benches to sit down if I get tired or any of those kinds of things. So again, small things for me when a lot of people have it worse, but it's a restriction to get used to. Just the impact of isolation on all of our relationships. You know, the awkwardness of people crossing the street when you're halfway down the block, you know, people almost not wanting to make eye contact because somehow we think, you know, I'm not sure that we're going to catch it by looking at each other, but it's just a lot of awkwardness that way. I think about celebrations of milestones, you know, weddings, births, you know, today was a graduation at Tyndale that didn't happen. Just being able to be present for people who we care about. You know, I really miss hugging my granddaughter and my 9-month-old grandson. A lot of those kinds of things. And just, you know, there's grieving financial losses and jobs with so many people where that's, they're facing those things. So this is a tough time. You know, I think we just have to recognize that, and there's no denying that.
There's kind of this sense that we're all just holding our breath, right? And I think
well said. Well
one
said.
of the things that is really hard to cope with, because there's this kind of wishful thinking that we're all going through of like, when I let go, when my breath can finally expire, we'll all just go back to the way things were. And I think we're now starting to realize, well, first, A, that might not be anytime soon. And B, when it does go back, it may not go back all the way to what life was like before.
That's right.
It might be a completely different reality that we're going to walk into after this is, you know, loosened up even just a little bit.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that kind of, I think, grieving, maybe grieving of the life that we had, the freedom that we had beforehand, and kind of accepting, you know, there's a whole new reality. We don't know what that's going to be. So
doesn't mean that it might not be better and different, and we can learn all kinds of things, but it is grieving right now what we have had. For sure.
Before I ask you the next question, I want to just throw it out there. I know there are some people who are watching. A few of our colleagues are even watching. Barb and Anne and Dennis and Terry, hello. But I think there's going to be other people that are watching as well. I just want to throw it out there. If people have questions, so today we're going to actually see if people have questions, if they want to post them online, if they're watching right now. If you have questions for Sharlene that arise as you're listening to this, please feel free to post them, and we'll see if we have time at the end to maybe try to answer your questions. So I'll put that out there.
Try.
Okay, so Sharlene, I'm going to ask you, how are we going to deal with this without feeling overwhelmed? Because that is one of the things I really do worry about, especially for my children, that they're going to feel so overwhelmed by the fact that they have not left the house in 3.5 weeks, except to, you know, go for a short walk on our street. My husband also has not left the house. So none of them have left the house. I have to get groceries, but, you know, how can we not feel overwhelmed as this kind of drags on longer into the, you know, month 2 and month 3?
Well, first of all, I hope it doesn't go into month 3. I might be overwhelmed just like that. No, just kidding.
Those prayers going, people.
That's right. That's right. And partly I think it is pacing ourselves with some of that, because even thinking, what if it does go that far, can be overwhelming. And so really kind of that focus on what can I handle today? And, you know, what are the things that I have control over? And so we're going to get to that in a minute. But I just want to make a disclaimer to say, like many of you, I've been reading all kinds of things about how people are suggesting that we cope. And I won't be acknowledging all of those people because I won't even remember who they are. But I'm just saying that, you know, a lot of these thoughts will not be original to me.
And thank you to all those people who are sharing those resources and information out there.
Exactly. So there's just a lot coming at us individually and collectively. And I think you layer on that different personalities. Some of us are thinkers and some are feelers. Some of us are good at doing the what if scenario, and others don't go there at all. I really envy those. Some of us are more comfortable expressing our feelings and maybe even do that in big ways. Others have kind of gotten the message somewhere along the way that we should just tough it out and maybe don't even know what feelings we do have and everything in between. And so, and it takes energy to process those feelings and work through that. And so I think it's kind of the balance there, again, of pacing ourselves with some of that. But it strikes me that we need to find some ways that we can kind of regain enough stability in our lives with the things that we can control, that it helps us to feel safe enough and have the energy to work through some of those other feelings and things that are going on for us. So how do we kind of process our experience and bring some regulation to our lives? Many of the more kind of contemplative writers now are referring to kind of the desert fathers and mothers who chose to live in isolation when the society that they were a part of at that time became very secular. And as they looked at how to do that, and then later even to live in some of the monastic orders, they talked about developing a rule of life. And that's really kind of an ancient tradition. It's a set of principles about and practices about how we build some rhythms into our lives that help us to deepen our relationship with God and serve Him, but then also to work with others. I am a big fan of Peter and Jerry Scazzaro, who are the ones who have done the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality series. And they have a great podcast around this that I would highly recommend. It's just, the website is, if you're not familiar with it, is just emotionallyhealthy.org. But they have a great analogy about feelings. They say, feelings are like taking kids on a vacation. Mm-hmm. You can't put them in the driver's seat. You can't lock them in the trunk, but you have to listen to them and pay attention and sometimes put boundaries around them. And I think that's just, I really resonate with that as an analogy. And I think, how do we care for our feelings and put some boundaries around them? So, if we think about sort of that whole idea of developing a rule of life and some of those rhythms, I think, we can, and they talk about, first of all, prayer. What is it that, and prayer being that wide definition of, anything where we lift our hearts to God. And so what is it that we as individuals need? And I think that's really going to vary with different people. For some of us, it may be finding ways to claim some solitude and silence, as hard as that is, when we're all together all the time. But finding a way to kind of quiet our minds so that we can even recognize what's going on for us and show up to God in that way. For others, it might be, writing down what's going on, writing down those fears and grieving kinds of things, and then bringing those to God. It may be, really meditating on short passages of scripture, just something that is a comfort to you and really sticking with that. Finding creative ways to lament. A lot of people are doing art projects and different kinds of ways that just express what their feelings are. And being intentional about stuff that we're grateful for. That really takes some intentionality at this point. But finding some of those kinds of things in particular. And then kind of the whole idea of rest. How do we find rest in this time? And that's not just sleeping, although that can be a challenge. I know, I know the 3:30 time slot, 3:30 a.m. Much better these days than I used to. I didn't look at my clock at that time, but I do now. But I think the most basic around that is really limiting exposure to information. You could be on the news constantly hearing the next thing. And we can't do anything about that. So finding ways, some credible sources of information and limiting the time. People manage that differently too. I know, we have variations in our household where my husband says, I like to watch the 11 o'clock news at night. It's been curated. I have all the information I need, and then I go to bed and sleep. I leave the room at 3 minutes to 11 because it does not help me. So just finding ways to that work for you around that. I think, focusing on the things that we can do. We're all trying to do the social distancing or physical distancing, washing hands, doing all those kinds of things. Another thing that may sound a bit strange, but is to limit the time that you spend worrying or problem solving. And sometimes actually setting a time to say between 3 and 4, I'm going to look at my finances, I'm going to do whatever, all those things that are struggling, that are weighing on me, and do it during that hour. And sometimes even symbolically saying, okay, I'm putting all those worries in a box now, putting them on a shelf, and I'll take them down again tomorrow. Some kind of a way to put that boundary. Creating a schedule of some kind. I mean, those of you who have kids are probably working really hard to try to do that, even if it's around homeschooling and those kinds of things as well. One thing I've heard too is to create some projects that are both short-term, but also some longer-term ones that help us think there is a future. We don't have to do this all right now, but something that kind of gives that longer perspective. And of course, as we can, finding just those things that help us to relax, you know, walking, reading a book, watching a movie together. I mean, it's, I'm sure there's lots of Netflix binging and all, but, you know, some of those things are just ways that we can also unwind, and those are important. Yeah.
One of the things I've been trying to keep in mind, and I read this article today, was about a mom who's just saying she's trying to do all these things. She's supposed to be working full-time. She's supposed to now be mom full-time and helping being a teacher full-time, teaching her kids. And then she's so concerned because her 6-year-old is just sitting watching TV all day.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I think, you know, that's exactly, I think, kind of just being kind to yourself, that you don't, you
Exactly.
can't be all of those things in that same time span of 8 hours a day. Like by the end of the day, you're absolutely exhausted emotionally, physically, mentally, from doing all of those things, and to the standard to which you want to do all of those things.
Exactly.
You know, maybe our standards have to change a little bit as to what is realistic.
I think that's exactly right. You know, we have to be gracious with ourselves. And again, if we take the long view, you know, if your kids are not able to, you know, achieve the same amount in this school year, they have their whole lives ahead of them. You know, I mean, worst case scenario, you have to, you know, this group has to repeat a year. The world won't end.
No.
You know, and keeping that long view, I think, is important. And you know, I think one of the other key things is really around relationships, and build, you know, spending more time ensuring that those are okay, as compared to necessarily checking all the things off your task list.
Right.
Because I think that's something we really need in terms of the emotional connection. We spend a lot of time together in the same space, but it doesn't mean that we're really attached and emotionally connected. And I think that's one of our very basic needs, and something that we really need to persevere in.
Yeah, that's
letting people know that we are known and seen and loved, and that they are. And I think particularly with kids, you know, it's probably more time hugging and just really connecting that way. And perhaps, you know, playing a game together is far more important than solving a math problem.
One of the things I have enjoyed with my family is that we eat all 3 meals together every single day. And we've never done that before, really, more than just Saturday and Sunday.
Yes.
Doing that consecutively now for 3 weeks, and you know, it's been oddly enjoyable to have so much time to sit together and eat together and enjoy a meal together. So that's been a good thing.
How are your kids feeling about your cooking? Or are they participating?
They love my cooking, apparently. I don't think they've had much to compare it to. So, you know, so we do have one question that has been posted from someone who's watching. So I think we should answer that because it is related to kids. So how do we help our children to process this right now when they're wondering when it will be over and we don't even know ourselves? What's a healthy way to explain it to them without dulling down what's really happening? Good one from Susanna Nacho, actually, is asking.
Well, what I want to say to Susanna Nacho and many others is that I have some really good resources that I could send to you around that, because I think it is a complex question. I think it's important to be able to acknowledge their feelings too, to be able to say, this is hard, we don't know, but we are, you know, in this together, to remind them, I think, that, you know, that of the promises that God has given us to in terms of being with us, and that this isn't a surprise to him, and that he's continuing to care for us, and to be able to point out as we see those glimpses of where God is at work in this, to be able to reinforce those as well. The other thing that I think is usually the case, and this is not to put pressure on parents, but our kids are good barometers of our stresses. And, you know, as we both process, yeah, this is hard and there's things that we're scared of and whatever, and yet continue to manage, I think they will learn from that as well. And so it's kind of that balance of, again, learning to express what's going on in the same way that we need to learn, but then also giving those reassurances.
I think I'm sorry.
So go ahead.
I think they're experiencing firsthand kind of the trust that they've read about in Bible stories, where
Yes.
they really had to trust God.
Exactly.
To know what was going to happen, because the future was so uncertain. And I think for the first time, they're really experiencing what it's like to have to be in a situation where you entirely have to trust God in this situation, that he will take care of this and he'll take care of you.
Exactly. And I think it's comforting too for kids to know that we struggle with that too.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're in a sense, we're on the same team trying to do the same thing. We're all trying to learn to trust in this uncertain time, and recognizing that, you know, some days are going to be harder than others. There's no doubt of that. And some hours are going to be harder than others.
For sure.
But that we are present for each other in that. I see our time is really
yes. Do you have some other points? Do you have some other points?
Well, I just wanted to say, as you were just saying, I think it's really important to be gentle with ourselves. Teresa of Avila said, have mercy on yourselves. We ask God to have mercy on us, but have mercy on ourselves as well. And I think it's also a time to be gentle with others. You know, this is a time to show plenty of grace, to give people the benefit of the doubt, choose what's worth getting upset about, so that sometimes we show up and be strong when somebody else needs the encouragement. And also to reach out to others, because, you know, this really is an opportunity. Even people who are extreme introverts are kind of finding that maybe not this much isolation. You know, God did make us for community, and so let's be that for each other. I think it's not to take the pain away, or necessarily to solve any problems, but to hold that heaviness together, and to remind each other that we're not alone, and to celebrate the many blessings actually that we do have during this time, because we have each other, but more importantly, our hope is in God, who has said that he will not leave us or forsake us. At this point, I really like Isaiah 43, 2-5, which is, you will pass through deep waters, but I will be with you. I'm the Lord your God. I am the one who saves you. You are priceless to me. I love you and honor you. Do not be afraid. I am with you.
Well, that's a good place to end, Sharlene. Those are good words for us as we go into this weekend and Good Friday and then Easter. So thank you for those words, and just for sharing with us today a lot of your wisdom around this topic.
Well, we all have a lot to learn from each other, and but that's the good thing. We do have each other.
So we just want to encourage everyone who is watching to just continue to be kind to yourselves and to each other. And this is a time in which we are still in community with one another, and we're bound to get together by God's love. So we are grateful that you are walking alongside us at CBM. So thank you for joining us today. And tomorrow, Sharlene, I'm pretty sure you won't want to miss this, 9:30 a.m. So it's going to be on earlier tomorrow morning. So our team leader in India, Suraj, who you know well, is going to be on with John Chance. So that should be a very interesting conversation, because there's a lot happening in India right now.
There is.
Yes.
I will look forward to that.
So that will be good. Thanks so much, Sharlene. Take care and have a good afternoon.
Thank you. You too.